we have Dr. Anand Vaidya with us. Anand is a faculty at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research here in Hyderabad. And he completed his undergraduation from Osmania University's Nizam College, which is in Hyderabad. And then he graduated from IIT Roorkee with his master's in science. After doing his PhD from Cornell, he spent years in Caltech and Yale University. His lab at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research tries to understand how mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, change their shape in response to cellular changes. And they are also interested in understanding the molecular details of biological clocks. Now, all of this sounds a little complicated, but I think Anand will simplify that for you over the next 1 hour. So we'll listen to Anand of what he has to share. Thanks, Anand. Over to you.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Chandrika, for that kind introduction. అందరికీ నమస్కారం. చంద్రిక గారు చెప్పినట్టు నేను ఇక్కడ హైదరాబాద్ నిజాం కాలేజ్ నుంచి చదివాను. దాని తర్వాత పై చదువులకు వేరే చోటు బయటికి వెళ్ళాను. సో ఈ రోజు టాక్ అంతా ఇంగ్లీష్ లోనే ఉంటుంది, ఎందుకంటే సైంటిఫిక్ పదాలన్నీ ఇంగ్లీష్ లో చెప్పడం ఈజీగా అవుతుంది. అందుకు నేను ఇంగ్లీష్ లోనే మాట్లాడతాను. కానీ మీకు తెలుగులో క్వశ్చన్స్ అడగాలన్నా కానీ, లేకుంటే ఏమైనా అర్థం కాలేదంటే తెలుగులో అవసరం ఉంటే నాకు మొమాట లేకుండా చెప్పండి. I request the teachers also to let me know at some point if there is some clarification needed, any language. I mean, English also is fine. But if there is a clarification that is needed, let me know and I will try to clarify a few points. With this, I would like to again thank Chandrika for organizing this and for this opportunity to talk to you all. So let us begin with some simple things. Oh, one more thing is I will be using some of the figures from your textbooks. So if you recognize those, you can try to recollect what you have read in the class. Can everybody hear me? Chandrika, can you hear?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So we will start. So today's topic is about, just a minute, give me one moment. Okay. Yeah. So today's topic that we are going to discuss is about hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a very important molecule. Some of you have already read in your textbooks. Some of you don't know about it, but you have all heard about hemoglobin, and today what we will learn or discuss is how hemoglobin is important, where is it important, what does hemoglobin do, how do scientists study hemoglobin. We'll try to discuss some of these aspects and some of the uses of hemoglobin. For example, as the title says, it is important in how is hemoglobin important in birds, or in how do babies, before they are born, how do they get their oxygen? And in COVID, there is a lot of breathing problem, right? There is lack of oxygen is one of the big problems in COVID. Why does that arise? What can we study with hemoglobin? What is the link? So today we'll try to address this. But before going to that, maybe first what we should do is we should try and see what exactly is hemoglobin doing, what exactly is oxygen doing, before we get into the more details. So first of all, what is what is respiration? So respiration is very similar to combustion. So what we see here is we see a wood that is burning, that many people use for cooking. Similarly, there is a gas stove here in the bottom, and there is also a bike here which has the engine. The engine is here. Maybe I will do this. Right? You can see this. So this is the engine of a bike. All of these three things, what they do is they generate energy. That is how your bike will run on petrol, or you can use gas stove for cooking. They generate energy by burning fuel. In this case, it is wood. In this case, it is the gas. In this case, it is petrol. And for all these three processes, they require oxygen. which is the most important, one of the most important aspect of combustion. So you have fuel and oxygen combined to give energy, which can be used for driving a bike, cooking, or for other purposes, right? Similarly, when we talk about living things, whether it is a bacteria or plants or insects or human beings, all of them, in this case, I have a picture of Albert Einstein, the famous scientist, E equal to mc square in physics. So even humans and bacteria and all organisms that you see, all living things, also do an exactly same thing as the bike or the gas stove. That is, we breathe oxygen, we consume oxygen, and the food that we eat will be burnt using that oxygen in our cells, which will generate energy for us to say, for example, I'm moving my hand, or I'm running, or I'm thinking and talking. All of these require energy. So in the body, the same process takes place, and it is called respiration, right? That you might have heard about respiration, right? So what exactly happens in respiration? So what we do here is, we know that oxygen is consumed in respiration. A good example is, if you take a candle, it burns with the flame. But if you put a glass on top of it, after some time, the candle flame will go away. You may have done this experiment in your school. Why does this happen? This happens because the oxygen is in the, when you put the bottle, the oxygen inside the bottle is consumed. There is no more oxygen, so the flame will go away. So oxygen, this experiment shows oxygen is very important. Similarly, if you take a plant and then put it in an airtight bottle, then after some days the plant will die, because there is no oxygen for the plant to survive. Now, this tells us how much oxygen we actually consume in the body. This is from your textbook, right? Some of you will recognize it. So what happens here is, on the left, we have three gases: oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. So when we breathe in, we are breathing in all the gases. We are breathing in oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, any gas that is there in the air, we will breathe in. But what happens specifically is to oxygen. So when you breathe in, we have 21% oxygen. When it goes into the lungs and comes out, when we breathe out, it is only 16% oxygen. This shows that the body has absorbed the oxygen, right? And similarly, if we look at carbon dioxide, there is only 0.03% which we breathe in, but when we breathe out, we have 4.4% carbon dioxide. There is more carbon dioxide that is coming out. So that means the body is generating carbon dioxide, just like a motorbike which generates carbon dioxide, right? But if you look at nitrogen, there is no change in nitrogen. So the body does not absorb or release. There is no change in nitrogen. This shows us that oxygen is consumed by the body and carbon dioxide is released by the body. So how does this happen? What happens to the oxygen? What happens to the carbon dioxide when we breathe in the air? This is what happens. So we breathe in air or oxygen through the nose. Air goes through the nose. It goes into our lungs. Our lungs will expand. And there, the blood takes the oxygen and gives away the carbon dioxide. So the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place in the lungs. Nitrogen there is no change. Carbon dioxide is released. Oxygen is taken by the blood. Now this blood goes to the tissues. It could be your brain, it could be your liver, it could be your heart, muscle, eyes, stomach, any tissue that you can think of, all tissues. So the blood goes to all of these tissues. These tissues have cells, and the cells have mitochondria. So the oxygen from the lungs goes into the blood, that goes to the tissues, then it goes to the cells, and finally it goes to the mitochondria. The oxygen goes to mitochondria. And the mitochondria are like the engine of the motorbike. I showed you the motorbike here, no? You have tire, you have horn, you have handle, but you have the engine. This engine is where the petrol and oxygen combine to give energy. So in the body, it is this mitochondria which is the engine of the entire body. and every cell has mitochondria. Okay, so this mitochondria gets the glucose that we eat, the oxygen that we breathe, combines both of those and generates the energy in the form of ATP. Maybe you'll learn it in higher classes, but ATP we will, if you have questions, we can talk about it later. But mitochondria is the most important. So how exactly does this look like? So this is a picture from, I think, from your 9th class textbook. So this is the cell, image of the cell, and these small yellow blue things are mitochondria. Yeah, if we zoom in, this is how mitochondria looks like. If you cut the mitochondria and look at it, so it has this complex structures. So what happens to the oxygen that goes from the air is it eventually finally reaches this mitochondria in the cell. Now, what happens to the carbon dioxide, right? You have a motorbike releasing carbon dioxide that comes into the air, but what happens here? Here, the mitochondria that generates the carbon dioxide takes the reverse path. It goes from the mitochondria, it goes out into the cell. You know, mitochondria releases, it goes into the cell. From the cell, it goes out into the tissues. From the tissue, it goes to the blood. From the blood, it goes to the lungs. And again, the carbon dioxide is released into the lungs. And when we breathe out, the air that comes out will have more carbon dioxide. So this is how oxygen reaches mitochondria, which is the engine or the powerhouse of the cell. And the carbon dioxide goes back to the lungs and we breathe out. Okay. Different organisms have different ways of doing this. For example, fish, they have gills. They have a different way of absorbing oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide. Plants have leaves where they have stroma, which open, oxygen goes in, carbon dioxide comes out. Plants also have roots from where oxygen goes in and out. And for example, reptiles have different ways of doing it, snakes. So different organisms have different ways of getting oxygen and carbon dioxide. In humans, blood plays the key role, very important role in this process. So this is again an image from your 10th class textbook, which shows on the right side what we have is the lungs, right? We have the two lungs. The air comes from here and it goes into the lungs. And this is called the bronchia. And if you can see, this bronchia splits up into many small fibers like roots here. You can see this here, no? If we zoom into the small final fiber that is shown here, this is called the bronchiole, which is the final part here. The small air bags that you have, they are called bronchiole. If you zoom in further, this is how it looks like. This is called the alveolus. So the oxygen finally comes into this air bag. It is like a football, very, very small, tiny football or a cricket ball, very small. What happens here is very important and very interesting, right? So you have blood vessels, blood flowing on the outside, and you have this air bag on the inside. So this is where the oxygen goes from the lungs, that is the alveolus, into the blood, and the carbon dioxide exchanges from the blood, it goes into the lungs, which is the alveolus. So this is the final part of the lungs. So this is where the exchange takes place. And this is very important because we will come back to this later. In case of COVID, there is breathing problem, or kids have pneumonia, which is another where they have breathing problem. Ayasamestundi antaru kada, gaali adatledu, upiri adatledu ante, that problem comes, one of the main reasons is in this alveolus, which we will come at the end of the talk. We will revisit this, okay? And we will also figure out why oxygen goes from lungs to blood and why carbon dioxide goes from blood to the lungs. Why does this exchange of gas takes place? And how do scientists study these things? So we will come to that in a few slides. But this is very important, where the exchange takes place. If you see here in the blood vessel, you have these red oval-shaped, what you call oval-shaped circle or oval-shaped things. These are called RBC or red blood corpuscles. You may have heard of this. RBCs in the cell are very important, and they are red in color. Now the question comes, it is this RBC is the one that takes the oxygen and gives away carbon dioxide. So red blood corpuscles are these cells which transport oxygen and carbon dioxide all in the body. So we have to take a closer look at the RBC. Okay. So what is this RBC? RBCs are cells which are present in the blood. Blood has many cells. One of them is RBC. Now, why is RBC important in transporting oxygen, carbon dioxide? That is linked to the color of the blood. You know, color of the RBC. Color of the blood is red because of RBC. Now, the question is, why are RBC red in color? That is the most important question. The reason why they are red in color is because they have a protein or they have a compound that's called hemoglobin. This hemoglobin is the one that carries oxygen and supplies it to all of the body. Now, let us take a closer look at hemoglobin. So what I will do now is I will switch from slides. I will switch to a board where I can draw and I can explain things to you. Okay, let me do that. Chandrika, I think others are, yeah, but there was somebody else who was sharing the screen. Please don't share the screen, students, because I will have to share. Okay. So what we'll do now is let me open a white board. Okay, let me write. Okay. So let us go through a little bit about hemoglobin. All right. Okay. So what we have come till now is hemoglobin is the moiety, or the hemoglobin is the one that gives red color to RBC, which is the one that transports oxygen and carbon dioxide. So let us see what is hemoglobin, right? So the important question that comes here is, what is hemoglobin? Is it a chemical, or is it a dye, or is it a pigment, or is it a protein? What is hemoglobin? That is the important question. Good. Somebody says it's a pigment. Good answer. So there are two things here. It is actually the correct answer for this is it is a pigment, right? And it is actually all of this. It is a chemical, it is a pigment, it is a protein, it could also be a dye. So this is the interesting thing about hemoglobin. Let us see what do I mean by hemoglobin is all of this. Okay. So if we break down hemoglobin, the word, it can be broken down as heme and it can be broken down as globin. So as many of you are mentioning in the chat, it is a pigment, and it is the heme which is the pigment, and it is the globin which is the protein part of it. Okay, heme is the pigment, correct, and protein is the globin, and when they combine together, they are called hemoglobin. But if we go one more step deeper, if we go one more step level down and say, okay, globin is what is it? It's a protein, it's a pigment. But what is a protein? What is a pigment? So if we have to look at that, then what we have to say is both a pigment and a protein are nothing but they are chemicals, right? For example, if we have to give an example of chemical, we can give some examples, right? Can you say any example? Can people chat? Can you know what? Can you know any chemicals? Can you send in the chat? What is the chemical? Example, any chemical. Acid, correct. Acid, HCl, correct. Good. Any other chemicals? Water, H2O is also a chemical. HCl, acid, is also a chemical. Exactly. Somebody said water. Carbohydrate or glucose, which is C6H12O6. It is also a chemical. Everything, all of these, everything that we see are chemicals. So hemoglobin, pigment, and protein, both of them are chemicals. And just to give you the formula of hemoglobin, it is large. It's a huge chemical. It has carbon is 2,952 carbons. How many hydrogens does it have? It has 4,664 hydrogens. How many nitrogens does it have? It has 812 nitrogens. How many oxygens does it have? It has 832 oxygens. And how many sulfurs does it have? It has 8 sulfurs. And very importantly, which we'll next go into, it has 4 ion molecules. So this is the chemical formula of hemoglobin. So you can see it is a large molecule compared to glucose, compared to water, compared to acid. It is a large molecule. And we will take a closer look at it. But first, let us see what is what is okay. Okay, let us now go to the next page. Okay, right. Okay, so now what I said is hemoglobin is both a protein and a compound, which I will show in the presentation in a little bit. But this ion is very important, which we have as Fe. Okay, ion is very important molecule, which is ion is represented as Fe, which comes as ferrum or ferric. So it is ferrum is the name for ion, and it is represented by Fe. So what ion does is it can form a bond with oxygen, O2, or it can form a chemical bond with carbon dioxide. It can also form chemical bond with other compounds like carbon monoxide. It can form a chemical bond with cyanide. You know, these two are very poisonous. We will come in a minute to that. So what this does is, when ion binds to oxygen, they bind very tightly, and that is present in hemoglobin. So that is how the oxygen that we breathe goes and binds to the iron atom in hemoglobin, and that will go all over the body. And when it reaches a tissue, for example, when we have a tissue, let us say this is the cell, okay, and you have blood vessel that is very close to the cell. So there is blood in this one. So what happens here is the oxygen is released from the iron. So here we have is blood, here it is iron, oxygen, okay. And in the cells, what we have is we have iron, carbon dioxide. This is in the cell. So this oxygen goes into the cell and carbon dioxide goes into the blood. The exchange takes place here. So when the blood leaves the cell, it will have Fe. Okay, maybe I will do it this way. This goes from lungs to cell, and this of hemoglobin goes from cell to lungs. Okay, this is what happens, and this exchange takes place here. So how do scientists figure out that these oxygen is important, how much oxygen is needed, and all the for binding to hemoglobin? What they do is they do these experiments, they're called binding curves. So what they do is, scientists, what we do is we plot a graph. We all do these graphs. So one side, what we're changing is amount of oxygen and ion oxygen binding. So we tried to see if we have 0 oxygen, how much will it bind to this? If there is no oxygen, nothing will bind. If we have 10% oxygen, then this much will be the binding. Okay? If there is 20% oxygen, this is 20%, then the binding is this much. This is 15%. Similarly, if we go to 30%, 40%, 50%, and then we go on till 100%, we try to see what happens. And then they measure how much oxygen is bind to the iron. And then we can draw a graph like this. So this is what scientists do. They study each of these oxygen, how much oxygen it will bind. And they can study this in the cell, or they can study this in the lungs. So if you do it, this will be different in the lungs, and it will be different in the tissues. So this would be the tissues, and this would be the lungs. So that is why the iron and oxygen binding or sticking will change. It's more in the tissues, and it is less in the lungs. And that is why there is this exchange that takes place when you have this oxygen flowing from lungs to the tissues. Okay. Now we know that this is how the hemoglobin works. So let us go back and let me explain one more thing before we go to the slide. Okay. Okay. So now what we'll take a look at is, let me quickly go to, let me explain one more. So now we know that hemoglobin is a protein and a pigment. So let us take a closer look at what is a protein. So a protein is made up of amino acids, right? So protein is made up of amino acids. And these amino acids are very important, because this amino acid, if there is a change in the amino acid, then the protein will not function very well. So how do scientists figure this out? Is they do something called another experiment called X-ray diffraction. You may have heard of diffraction in your physics, no? So what does this do? What this X-ray diffraction does is it gives, you can take photographs of proteins or molecules using X-rays, and that will give you the shape, size, all the details of the proteins. It will give you all the details of the carbon, the hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, iron. You can see all of this. So basically what this X-ray does is you can take photo of molecules. And it is important to know that the first people who took this X-ray photograph of hemoglobin, they won the Nobel Prize for that photograph. When they take X-ray photograph of this hemoglobin, they got Nobel Prize. The people, one of them is Max Perutz. He won the Nobel Prize along with others. So now what we'll do is we will take a look at how this hemoglobin looks like when we have to take a 3D image or a 3D photograph of this. Okay, so let me share this screen. Okay. So this is the RBC. This is the heme group, which all of you were talking as pigment, right? So this is the pigment. This and the protein I will show you in the next slide. So iron that you can see here, Fe is the iron which is present in the heme group. This huge structure, the chemical around the iron is called the porphyrin ring. And if you remember from your textbook, chloroplast also have a similar structure, which has chloroplast is also, it has a protein and it has a pigment. The pigment there is also this porphyrin ring, but instead of iron, you have magnesium in that chloroplast. We will not go into the details in this time, maybe some other interaction in the future, we can talk about chloroplast. Now let us take a look at how the molecule looks like. When you take an X-ray photograph of sorry. Chandrika, I don't seem to see all of my. Let me quickly troubleshoot this. I can't see one of the. Oh, I should stop sharing. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Now I will. Yes. I still can't see. Oh, show all windows. Okay. Yes, I can now see. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yes. So this is the hemoglobin protein. This is how the hemoglobin protein looks like. And if we zoom into, this is the X-ray photograph that scientists get. This is the kind of research that I do. If we zoom in and go deeper into this, and we look at this part here, you can see this structure. Can everybody see the structure here? This structure that you see here is the porphyrin ring that I showed. There was all this ring, and in the middle, the red part here is the iron. So you have iron here, you have nitrogen that is in blue. These are all the porphyrin rings that we have. This is carbon, this is hydrogen. So this is the heme group, and this is how the protein looks like. Okay, these stars are water molecules. So this is the kind of structure or the photograph that scientists that we come up for proteins. Now let me change this to a different form. Okay, I will hide everything. We'll show them as lines. Okay, now what I've done is I have shown okay. So here I have shown everything as atoms. So if we take a closer look at it, it is very confusing and complex, but this is how many proteins are. If you zoom in further, you can see some of these lines are carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and all the different atoms. And this is the yellow part that you see here. This yellow ring is the porphyrin ring. Okay. So scientists, we all try to see how. Let us make it simple, and let us take a look at it this way. It is simpler. So this is the molecule, the protein molecule. Okay. So now what we'll do is we'll try to understand how this heme group is important for birds and babies and in COVID. So what happens when we talk about okay, see the screen. Okay, so let us go this one. Okay, so let us draw something here. Okay, so in what happens in birds, because birds, if you take a mountain, we are living here, right? There is a lot of oxygen. But as we move up when we go to higher altitudes, let us say on a mountain, let's say in Bangalore or Dehradun or in Himalayas, we have low oxygen, but birds survive there, and there are a lot of human beings also there. How do these birds survive in low oxygen? So the way birds survive in low oxygen, they can do two things. One, they can have more hemoglobin, or they can, iron can bind to the oxygen. It is very tight. So this way, we can, the birds, what they do is they will have more hemoglobin, so more oxygen can bind to the hemoglobin, or they will have mutation, they will have changes in the hemoglobin, the protein globin that I showed in green color. They can have changes in the amino acid so that the iron will bind to the oxygen. The iron can bind to the oxygen more tightly. So mutation. So in here, mutation is actually good for the bird. So mutations can be bad, but mutations can also be good. Mutation in the amino acids. Okay. How do babies get their oxygen? Let us see, how do they get the oxygen? Babies. So the way babies get the oxygen is they get it from the mother's blood. The mother takes oxygen, it goes into the mother's blood, and the baby's blood and the mother's blood will come very close to each other, just like the alveoli that I showed earlier. Let us draw this here. So this is the baby's blood here. And what happens is, this is the mother. Let us put that as green in color. Okay. This is mother and this is baby. What happens here is they're so close to each other. The baby's blood, it does a very similar thing as this. The iron of baby, Fe baby, will stick to the oxygen tightly when compared to Fe mother oxygen. So when these two come close to each other, there it is like a magnet. The iron from the baby's blood will pull this oxygen from the mother's blood, and it will push carbon dioxide into the mother's blood. So that exchange takes place because baby's blood hemoglobin has a mutation which will increase the iron oxygen interaction, or they are very tight. So that is how the baby gets the oxygen from the mother. After the baby is born, when the baby grows 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months old, this is removed from the baby. The body will slowly remove this baby blood, and it will just have the new blood that is formed, and that will have regular, very normal, it won't be very tight oxygen binding. Okay, that is with babies. What happens in COVID? That is the third part, right? In COVID, what happens is that alveoli that we were talking about, maybe we should go back to that alveoli. Here. What happens there in COVID is when we look at this is where the lungs, you have the alveoli, you have carbon dioxide, oxygen, which are exchanged with the blood. What happens in COVID patients, when in some of them, is there is infection in the lungs, right? So because of this infection, because of the SARS-CoV virus, there is a lot of water, there is dead cells and pus, all of that are collected in this alveolus. So this is filled with liquid. So now you have oxygen here, you have blood here, but they are separated by the pus and water and everything in the lungs. So this exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide will not take place. That is why there will be more breathing problem in COVID because of this exchange of oxygen is stopped because of the liquid that is filling up the alveolus. Also in kids, when they have pneumonia, this is what happens. There is liquid that fills into the alveolus and there is no exchange of gases. And that's why people have breathing problems. So they have to be given extra oxygen to push it into this liquid so that it can go to the blood. What we'll talk about in the last two slides or last two topics are about why is iron so important. One of the reasons why it is important is because it binds to oxygen. But as I mentioned, it also binds to carbon monoxide. It binds very tightly to carbon monoxide. That is why we have to be very careful when we are in pollution. But for example, when we get all the pollution from car or bus or train or scooter, there is a lot of carbon monoxide in that exhaust. If we breathe in the carbon monoxide, then the iron in the hemoglobin will tightly hold to carbon monoxide, and it cannot hold oxygen because it is already filled with and it is tightly holding carbon monoxide. That will lead to carbon monoxide poisoning and lot of health problems. Similarly, if we are using for cooking, many of us have seen we use wood for cooking, or we use coal for cooking in the houses. That will also release a lot of carbon monoxide, which if we breathe in, it will bind to the iron in the hemoglobin and prevent oxygen from binding. So one has to be very, very careful when you are in pollution or when you're outside. That's why we have to cover our nose with mask or hand, or we should stay away from pollution. And that's why we should use gas stoves, which will not generate carbon monoxide, because the carbon monoxide will interact with iron and prevent oxygen from binding. So that is very, very important. And the last thing that we'll talk about is this oximeter. We spoke, you know that in COVID, many people have oximeter, which is put on top of your finger, that will tell you how much oxygen is present in the body. That is very important. And the way that oximeter works is also, it goes down to this hemoglobin. How much of the iron in the hemoglobin is tightly bound to oxygen, how much of it is bound to carbon dioxide. That is what the oximeter will do. It will check using infrared rays. It will check how much is oxygen blood and how much is carbon dioxide blood. If the oxygen blood is more than 95%, then it is very good. But if it is less than 90%, then that means this alveoli is filled with liquid, most likely filled with liquid, and the oxygen is not being provided to the red blood cells and to the hemoglobin. So what we learned today is the oxygen that we breathe in goes to the cells and it goes to the mitochondria. Mitochondria are like the engines which do combustion, or which is also called respiration. And the blood, the hemoglobin in the RBC of the blood has iron atom, which is important for transporting oxygen and carbon dioxide. So this is what we have learned. With this, I think I will stop, because we are also running out of time, and I can take questions. Chandrika, maybe you can let me know if there are any questions. Thank you to all of you.
Sure. Thank you, Anand, for this interesting talk. So students, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and I will see if I can unmute you so that you can ask a question. Otherwise, just type in the chat box and we will read it out to Anand. So Anand, you can also pay attention to chat box. I will also start keeping an account. Yeah.
Yes. Don't feel shy, okay? Ask your questions, any question that you have.
Chaitanya, you can ask your question. You can unmute yourself. I have given you the permission. Yeah, please ask your question.
Ma'am, I did not have any question, ma'am.
Okay, no problem.
It's
Sir,
touched and come, sir. Sorry.
No problem.
what is meant by bronchia? So bronchia are let us go back to this. So as I said, different organisms have different ways of breathing. Oh, we should go to this image, no? Yes. So this maybe the teachers can let me know. So when we breathe air, it goes into the nose, into the esophagus, that goes, but the bronchia are the one that goes through the lungs that connect the nose, and it goes into the lungs. So this is the bronchia. That is the organ. Different fishes have gills. They have different things that carry the oxygen. It is like the pipe. Other questions? What is mutation and how is it good and bad for organism? That's a very good question. So you will learn this as you go higher. So you are Krupakar is from 8th standard. Okay. So what happens is mutation. So we hear that COVID, the virus is mutating and it is becoming more deadly and all of those. So what happens is in mutation, maybe everybody can mute for a minute. Everybody can you all mute your microphone? Okay, thank you. So all these proteins, for example, whenever all the different activities in the body, let's say from digestion to looking at you or breathing, all of these are done by proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids. They are long molecules. That is why if you see the chemical formula that I gave, it has 2,900 carbons. It has 4,000 hydrogens. This is a long molecule which has many amino acids. And each of these amino acids are important for the function of the protein. When we say there is a mutation, that means one amino acid has been changed to a different amino acid. There are 21 amino acids. So when the amino acid is changed in the protein, sometimes, many times it will have no effect on the protein. If 90% of these mutations have no change in the protein or the function of the protein. But sometimes the mutation can be bad to the protein. Sometimes it can be good to the protein. For example, if you take hemoglobin, there can one mutation, or that is a change in the amino acid near the iron, it can increase the binding, or it can make the iron hold the oxygen more tightly, which is a good mutation for the birds, right? But if you have a mutation that will reduce the tight binding, or it will have loose binding, then that mutation will be bad for the birds. So that change in amino acid is called mutation, and some mutations are good because they will help the protein and the body function better. Some mutations are bad because they will reduce the function of the protein and it will lead to disease. For example, cancer can cause because of mutation. If you look at coronavirus, the mutation which are good for the virus because the virus can spread more is bad for us, because the virus spreads more, then we will have more disease. So that is why mutations are good and bad. Next question is, what is DNA replication? This is, again, you will study this in the higher class, but this mutation that are occurring in the protein will occur first in the DNA. And DNA replication means you have to make duplicate copies of DNA. For example, when you have cell division, mitosis or meiosis, one cell becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, the DNA has to be copied. It is like a Xerox copy. And that is what is DNA replication. So this is a very good question, because in this copy, when you have DNA replication, you can have mistakes in the copy. And that will lead to mutations, and that will lead to changes in protein. Okay. You can type your questions here. What is meant by phosphine dry? I don't know what this is. Porphyrin. Sorry, that is the porphyrin. Maybe that is what you're asking. Yes, yes. So porphyrin is this ring. It is this chemical that you see here. No, this entire chemical that you have is called porphyrin. So you have a carbon atom at each of these vertices. You have a carbon here. You have a carbon here, here. So this whole thing is called, this chemical is called, this is the dye. So if you take this porphyrin, this dye, and you put it on clothes, it will actually become red in color with iron. So this is that is why I said hemoglobin is a dye, it is a pigment. This is the pigment. It is a protein, it is a chemical. So porphyrin is this dye. This whole thing is called porphyrin. Okay, that is how many amino acids in human body? That is a very good question again. You have hundreds of crores of amino acids in the body because each cell has thousands of proteins. Each protein is made up of thousands of amino acids, right? So we have millions of amino acids in one, tens of crores of amino acids in one cell. And we have billions of cells, millions, billions of cells all over the body. So the number of amino acids changes from one person to another person. But in general, you have many, many crores, many, many billions of amino acids in the human body. A huge number of amino acids. What is vitamin B12? Okay. Vitamin B12 is also a chemical like this. It is a large chemical. It is much larger than porphyrin, but it is smaller than a protein. And that is a good question because vitamin B12 was one of the first molecules, big molecules, whose photograph required X-ray for taking a photograph of these molecules. And the person the person Dorothy Hodgkins, who worked on vitamin B12, she won the Nobel Prize for taking that X-ray photograph of vitamin B12. So vitamin B12, even though it is not very important for our hemoglobin discussion today, it is very important for the tool that we use for X-rays of taking photographs. Okay, please type your questions.
Anand, there's a question from YouTube.
Yes. Sir, is asthma patient, will the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide occur slowly? Very good question again. So I gave you one way in which breathing problem can occur because there is this alveoli where the liquid can fill up. But in asthma, there are other ways in which one can have the same issue. There can be inflammation of tissues sometimes. Some people have allergies. So there are different ways in which that same oxygen carbon dioxide exchange can be blocked, and that is right. In there, that exchange is also reduced. That is why the asthma patients take a medicine that they breathe very quickly. They take puffs which will go in, and that will open up or expand these airways so that more oxygen can be taken in. That's right. What is pigment and how it helps? Pigments can be anything. It is for example, chloroplasts have chlorophyll, which is a pigment, which is basically a chemical that is part of a protein. It is called a pigment. That is what it is. Fundamentally, it is a chemical. It can have iron, it can have magnesium, it can have sulfur, it can have manganese, it is a chemical. It has carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, all of these in it. So that is what it is, a chemical which has a specific function in a body. So it's called pigment. Okay. While we wait for what happens if HB percentage, which is hemoglobin percent, increases and if it decreases? This is again a very good question. So as I was talking about birds, if you see, there are many human beings who live in mountains, very high in Himalayas, in Tibet, they live in mountains. So there, the percentage of oxygen in the air is not 21%. It is much less, much lesser percent, 18%, 19%. So there, if they have to survive, because there they will have less oxygen to breathe in. So what the body does is to adjust to this low oxygen level in the high mountains, the body will produce more hemoglobin. It will produce more red blood corpuscles, RBC, so that there will be more iron, more hemoglobin to take in all the oxygen from the air. That is why higher hemoglobin will help in getting more oxygen. Many athletes, you see in Olympics, you have recently we had sorry, can you hear me, Chandrika? Hi.
Yes, Anand, we can hear
Yes. So recently we had Neeraj Chopra, who won gold medal. We have the hockey teams which won bronze medal, and PV Sindhu. Now, so many of these athletes, what they do, sports people, they actually go to mountains. They go to higher elevation cities which are in mountains, and they actually live there for several months, and they do their training and exercises there. Because what happens there is when they do exercise there, they will get more hemoglobin, more red blood cells in their blood. And so when they come for competitions in Olympics, they can actually get a little bit more, they can breathe more oxygen, and that will give them more power to play the game. So many athletes nowadays go and train in mountains before any important event like Olympics. Okay. What are the other questions? Nowadays, COVID filling lungs. Why? Yes, that is another point. So you will know this is a common thing. Whenever a body is trying to fight infection, whether let's say you have a cut, then sometimes you form pus that is formed, or you have a heat, you got a burn when you're cooking, there will be a boil and you will have pus inside that is formed, right? Why is that pus formed? Or when you have a cut, there is a lot of some liquid that is formed that will come out, right? That is formed whenever the body's immune system is fighting an infection. So imagine this like a battle. It is like a war. In Bahubali, you had this huge war where soldiers were fighting. You had thieves and the kings fighting, and so many soldiers are killed in there. Similarly, in the body, you have bacteria, virus, and then our human cells fighting these bacteria, virus. So many bacteria are killed, human cells are killed. All these dead cells are pus that is formed. There is a lot of liquid that is formed in there. So if it is an external wound, let's say on the hand, then you can clean it with Dettol, you can remove it, you can inject and remove. But if it is with COVID, the fighting is taking place in the lungs. So when whatever is liquid is formed, pus is formed, it is unable to come out of the lungs easily. So it is that liquid is settling in the lungs, and that is why they are filling the lungs and preventing this oxygen exchange. Yeah, there's a question about autoimmune disease. Can we prevent these diseases? That's a very good question again. There are many autoimmune diseases. HIV is one of those. So there are 2-3 years ago. Yes.
Sorry, if I may interrupt, there's one follow-up question which is very interesting.
Oh, please go ahead.
Just that it's from Akhira, who says that you just now said that mountains there is very less oxygen. Then why do athletes go there to gain hemoglobin?
Yes. So this is the beauty of our body. What the body does is it adjusts very quickly to the environment around us. For example, in the summer, when there is more heat, we start sweating because that will cool our body. In the winter, when it is cold, we'll shiver, because when we shiver, that will generate heat and keep the body warm. Similarly, so the body adjusts to the environment. So when athletes go to mountain, their body realizes that there is less oxygen, that the cells are getting less oxygen. So how can the body help in this situation is the body will produce more red blood cells, and more red blood cells means more hemoglobin, more oxygen is taken up by the red blood cells. So a simple experiment that can be done is, if I take a blood sample, let's say a blood sample from my body, some 2 ml blood in Hyderabad, and then check how much red blood cells, how many red blood cells I have. Then I go to Himalayas for 2-3 months, and then take another sample of blood and see how many red blood cells I have. The body will increase the red blood cells because there is less oxygen. So it wants to take all of that oxygen by having more red blood cells. Okay. Why is blood red in color? Because of heme, because of this slide that you see. Iron containing compounds, if you see rust, jang pattindi antar kada, dinki, iron dinki, jango, that rust is also red in color. Why? Because it has this iron. Iron, when it interacts with oxygen, it is red in color. Okay, that is why blood is red in color. Chandrika, are there any? I mean, I can see questions, but can you point out the questions?
Maybe you could come back to the autoimmune question and then.
Yes. Yes. Autoimmune is not. I mean, it is not directly linked to this one, but what happens is the body's immune system. We were trying to see. We were talking about how pus is formed, wherein the body cells, immune cells, are fighting with infection. Then it kills the bacteria. So this immune system, sometimes what it does is there is a mistake, and these immune cells will attack human cells instead of attacking bacterial cells. So that is an autoimmune disease. In these cases, it is difficult to prevent these diseases. There are some solutions, therapy to this. One way is to take chemicals or tablets which will reduce the immune response, or it will reduce the activity of the immune cells, so that the number of soldier cells are reduced, so that it will not attack the human cells. But the problem with that is, then if you reduce the number of soldier cells or immune cells, then bacteria can also attack. So that is the problem. Now, there is 2-3 years ago, there was a Nobel Prize for immunotherapy. There is something called immunotherapy for cancer or for other diseases. What they do in this immunotherapy is they take cells from the bone marrow of that patient or individual. They make changes in that cells and they put it back into the same patient who has autoimmune disease. So now there are new immune cells which can fight against, which are much better, which don't have this autoimmune problem. So if you want, you can look up in Google. This is called cancer immunotherapy. This was given a Nobel Prize a few years ago. And you will know how that is. In stem cell therapy, there are new therapies. Those are the kind of therapies that can be used to fight autoimmune diseases. Okay.
So Anand, we'll take maybe one last question from YouTube. And students, thank you for your questions, and I will note them, and we'll share with Anand, and if there are answers, we will share it back with you, right? Because we know that all of you are asking a lot of interesting questions, but in the interest of time, so one question from YouTube is asked by Joydev Acharya, who says, is there an artificial source for hemoglobin in the form of a tablet or an injection, more specifically in the case of athletics?
Very good question. That is a good question. So the artificial source is, there is no, so you have to take blood from one person, or take it from blood bank and then give it to this other person. That is the way, an easy way of increasing the RBCs, the artificial quick way of doing it. And that is used not by athletes, but it is used in medicine for therapy. For example, some of the students, 10th class students, may know of thalassemia, which is in your textbooks. It is a disease in the RBC. Similarly, there is another disease which is called sickle cell anemia. All of these have problems in the RBC and hemoglobin. So in these patients, they have to undergo constant blood transfusion. So every 2-3 months, they have to go to hospital, get fresh blood from blood bank into their body. So that is the artificial way of adding, or direct way of adding red blood cells. About tablets. So if you may have heard from your parents or grandparents that sometimes you feel very weak. They feel very weak. And they go to doctor does a blood test and says your RBC count is low. You have very less RBC. So I'm giving you iron tablets. Eat food which have rich in iron. What that does is, when we take iron tablets, the body will realize that, oh, there is more iron. So we have to generate more hemoglobin. So for example, if you look at this structure on the screen, if you take more iron, then the body will generate all the other necessary things, like the porphyrin. It will generate more hemoglobin, the globin protein, and that will increase the hemoglobin percentage, which will increase the RBC in the cells. So taking iron will help in these, or taking heme tablets. There are different ways. Or the best way to do this is take vegetables which are good, or fruits which are good in iron, which will then increase your RBC. And the last two things I want to say before we end is, where is mitochondria? That's, I see that question. That's a very good question. Mitochondria is present in all the cells of all human beings, plants, animals. It is present in every cell. That if you to look at your 9th class textbook, when you go to here, this is from 8th class students. So you look at 9th class, every cell has many mitochondria. Okay, that is the that is where mitochondria are present. I would like to stress that you should be very careful when there is smoke or pollution, because they have carbon monoxide. Whether you're cooking, anybody is cooking with wood or coal, you should avoid that and use gas stoves. You should stay far away from pollution, because if you breathe in carbon monoxide, then this iron atom will tightly bind or hold to carbon monoxide, and that will not bind to, or it cannot take oxygen. So you will have breathing problems, and then you'll have health problems. So please be careful about carbon monoxide poisoning. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Anand. I hope the students learned something from you, and the interaction was, I think, really nice. So thank you very much. And for all the TIFR-H students and teachers and all those who are joining us on YouTube, thank you for being with us. And this series is going to continue. So every 4th Saturday, we will have scientists talking about their work or something like this, picking up things that are relevant in their curriculum, and seeing how scientists actually work on that. So thank you very much, everybody. And see you all soon. Thanks, Anand.
Thank you. Thanks, Chandrika. Thanks to all the students and the teachers.